Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad Incorporated is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was founded in 1968. Both the railroad and the Billy Mason Carousel exist as a legacy of Billy Jones and as a means to preserve history and entertain the public. The Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad operates in Oak Meadows Park with the cooperation of the town of Los Gatos, and in Vasona Park with the cooperation of the Santa Clara County Parks and Recreation Department. Billy Jones was a railroad man nearly his entire life. He was born in 1884 in Ben Lomond, California. At the age of 13, he began his railroad employment as a roustabout with the South Pacific Coast Railroad. He would eventually work for the Southern Pacific Railroad, running locomotives up and down the California coast until his retirement in 1950. In 1939, Billy was on a layover in San Francisco and noticed a rusty old steam locomotive in a scrapyard, destined to be shipped to Japan. Billy decided to purchase the 1/3 scale locomotive and then transferred it to his ranch in Los Gatos, where he would spend countless hours restoring the engine. Now, I'm a Bay Area, California native, and this locomotive, the 2-spot, is kind of our flagship grand scale locomotive. I grew up chasing the 2-spot around the park in the 80s and 90s and would enjoy frequent cab rides from the friendly engineers. The number 2 would go on to be the centerpiece of Billy's Railroad, which eventually opened on his ranch in 1943. For 25 years, Billy ran the Wildcat Railroad on his ranch free of charge, accepting donations as his only form of payment. Children and families from all over the valley enjoyed coming to his ranch and experiencing the thrill of riding behind a real steam engine. One of the many guests of the Wildcat Railroad was none other than Walt Disney, who became fast friends with Billy and often invited him to visit Disneyland and engineer on the Disneyland Railroad. Billy was an active member in the community and involved himself in a number of charitable organizations. He would often donate to various children's hospitals, orphanages, and special interest groups, but only on the condition he remained anonymous. Billy passed away in January 1968, but his railroad would continue to serve the town of Los Gatos and surrounding communities for generations to come. Following Billy's death, a group of civil-minded businessmen decided the Wildcat Railroad needed to be saved. They formed a group which founded Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad Incorporated, a non-profit corporation dedicated to the preservation of the railroad history, affordable family entertainment, and the education of youth. So the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad wasn't always here in Vasona Park. Just to be clear, the original Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad was on Billy's property, right down the road from here, off Winchester Avenue. When the Wildcat Railroad was on Billy's ranch, I used to hear fun stories of cars pacing the train. Well, it zipped down the tracks on his ranch that ran parallel to Winchester Avenue. After Billy's passing, the entire railroad was then transferred to a parcel of land in the adjoining Oaks Meadow and Vasona Park in Los Gatos. Structures, including an engine house and train depot, along with nearly a mile of track, would eventually be built. A bridge spanning the Los Gatos Creek was also installed utilizing an old Southern Pacific flat car. Finally, on July 26, 1970, the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad began operations and continues to this day. The Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad is known worldwide. The railroad and its famous number 2 steam locomotive, the 2-spot, have been featured in numerous publications and television programs, including On the Road with Charles Kurrat and CBS's Five's Eye on the Bay. Most important, however, is the joy that the railroad continues to give to the young and young at heart who enjoy the thrill of riding the rails. By 1992, the railroad was averaging over 100,000 riders each year. Let's talk a little bit about the 2-spot. Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad number 2 was built by Johnson Machine Works in Los Angeles in 1905, exclusively for the Venice Miniature Railway in Southern California. Designed by John J. Coit, the number 2 is a 260 Prairie-type locomotive, weighing in over at 9,000 pounds. It was constructed to a 1/3 scale, running on 18-inch gauge track. To us train guys, this is known as grand scale. The number 2 ran at Venice Beach from 1905 until 1925, when the Venice Beach Miniature Railroad closed. The number 2 faded from history until it was discovered by Billy Jones in San Francisco in 1939. Following a thorough restoration, Billy ran the locomotive on his ranch until his death in 1968. After the Wildcat Railroad was transferred to Oaks Meadow and Vasona Parks, the number 2 was again restored and continued regular operation until 1994. From 1994 until 2005, the number 2 went under a complete restoration, including the replacement of the original boiler. It's fascinating to think that in the early 90s, while I was riding behind the 2-spot, that she was still steaming with her original boiler. The number 2 finally returned to service in the summer of 2005, and the occasion not only marked the 35th anniversary of the Billy Jones and Wildcat Railroad in Oak Meadow and Vasona Parks, but also celebrated the number 2's 100th birthday. Yes, the 2-spot is over 100 years old. Billy Jones and Wildcat's Railroad, first diesel. I remember the day they got her. To be honest with you, I was a little afraid that maybe it was the end of the 2-spot. Nope, she just needed a little bit of help, and a long-needed break, and a new boiler. Painted in the unmistakable Southern Pacific Black Widow color scheme, the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad number 2502 has a unique history as the first diesel locomotive on the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad. Built in 1992 by Custom Locomotive Works in Chicago, the locomotive was purchased by the late Al Smith and donated to the railroad. Smith, who had incorporated Orchard Supply Hardware, was also a train buff and spent countless hours at the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad and at his own ranch north of Santa Cruz. Number 2502 received its number from one of Smith's other locomotives, which he ran on the Swanton Pacific Railroad located on his ranch. That particular diesel was numbered Southern Pacific Railroad number 502, hence number 2502 became the second 502. When the famous 2-spot went down for repair in 1994, number 2502 became the mainstay of the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad locomotive fleet. In early 2002, Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad Incorporated determined that an additional diesel locomotive was necessary to assist with regular operation. Following a series of fundraising efforts, the railroad contracted with Merrick Light Railway Equipment Works in Marshall, Wisconsin, to construct a diesel similar to the style of 2502. Much of the funding for the new number 3502 was received from the late Larry Peterson. In early winter of 2005, number 3502 was delivered to the railroad and joined its sister locomotives, number 2 and number 2502, on the Billy Jones and Wildcat Railroad locomotive roster. Like number 2502, number 3502 is similar in design and features a green and gold paint scheme. Number 4 has the distinction of being the first locomotive constructed entirely in the shops of Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad. It was designed and built by Tom Waterfall, one of the railroad's many volunteers. Although number 4 was designed to service the railroad's switcher engine, I often see her running passenger service as well. Just to do a little recap, the railroad has the steam locomotive, the 2-spot, and 2 diesels, 2502 and 3502. That brings us up to 3 locomotives capable of pulling very heavy trains full of very happy passengers. Now here's an exciting event that really solidified the continuance of steam with a healthy new beginning for the Billy Jones and Wildcat Railroad. The 2-spot was the flagship locomotive, and, well, their only steam locomotive. I remember before any diesel was purchased, and the 2-spot was doing all the pulling power, but the Wildcat Railroad was not done with steam yet, and one steam locomotive just wasn't enough. Make way, she's big. Here comes number 5, the newest and largest member of the Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad's fleet. Like the number 2, number 5 is a 1/3 scale steam locomotive, yet number 5 is nearly 9 feet longer and features a 462 Pacific style design. Following nearly 70 years of service on the railroad, the number 2 was in need of additional help. The railroad deemed it necessary to add another steam locomotive to the roster and again contracted with Merrick Light Railway Equipment Works for the new locomotive's construction. Number 5 was eventually delivered to the railroad in April 2013. The arrival concluded a nearly 7-year process from conception to finish, and the new locomotive guaranteed the railroad would remain a steam railroad for generations to come. It was a very exciting time for the railroad. I remember the first time I saw number 5. This thing was beautiful and big, capable of hauling pretty much every piece of equipment the railroad owned. She's been a beautiful and healthy addition to the railroad. The inaugural trip was highlighted by a doubleheader featuring both number 5 and number 2, making the first time in the railroad's long history that a steam doubleheader had ever been employed. The occasion was a great cause for celebration, and crowds by the thousands made their way to watch and participate in the historic event. The railroad owns 5 open-air passenger cars, 4 of which came from Billy Jones Ranch and were originally built for the Overfair Railway at the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition. Also worth noting, a handicap car was built for wheelchair passengers in the mid-90s for ADA compliance. Each of the passenger cars can seat up to 24 passengers, while the handicap car can seat up to 3 wheelchairs, or roughly 12 passengers. A train composed of all 5 cars can carry 108 passengers. This can create capacity issues on the railroad's busy days. To alleviate this issue, the railroad commenced construction of a 5th regular car, which is slightly different in construction, using modular seats for easier cleaning. Because the original car drawings are lost, the railroad had to resort to reverse engineering one of the existing cars. The car, named Live Oak, entered revenue service on December 10th, 2016. A full 6-car train can seat up to 132 passengers at once, 120 if the handicap car is not used. In the following years, cars 1 through 4 were rebuilt by volunteers at the same standards as Live Oak. In the addition to the passenger cars, the railroad also owns a utility flat and a ballast hopper for work trains, plus 3 flat cars donated to the railroad in 2015, of which only one is railworthy and mainly used for storing the ramps used to get equipment on and off the trucks. To be honest with you, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Billy Jones Railroad. There's a lot more to talk about. There's a couple other mystery locomotives out there as well. I actually know the guys that hold the key to such mystery. We'll have to touch up on that in a later episode. This railroad holds a special place in many people's hearts, as well as the surrounding communities. Hats off to the crew for maintaining such a wonderful railroad for generations to come. If you're visiting in and around the California Bay Area, I recommend coming and checking out Billy Jones Railroad. I hope you enjoyed this documentary. Please consider subscribing for more train videos. And always, keep steaming.